Today it's going to be quite a short video. We're visiting two very interesting museums in central London, quite overlooked, both well worth a visit. I particularly enjoyed the John Soane's museum, but neither of these museums allow video inside, so they're opposite each other. So I've done them at the same time, and I actually walked straight from one to the other when I visited. We're going to start at the Hunterian Museum, which is on the south side of Lincoln's Inn Field, and then we'll stroll through Lincoln's Inn Field over to the Sir John Soane's Museum. Both of them are very eclectic. They have the 18th and 19th century museum feel, which you often lose in larger museums today. Both museums are quite a short walk from Holborn Station, or if you're walking from the south, you can easily get there from Temple Tube. The Hunterian Museum is housed inside the Royal College of Surgeons. It's about half of one floor, and it comprises 70,000 items. Obviously not all are on display. It was founded by John Hunter from just outside of Glasgow, and he was one of the leading doctors of his time. And he carried out a lot of dissections of animals and post-mortems, and there is some fairly gruesome and grisly stuff. You see babies inside jars and all sorts of body parts that have been cut out and put inside of, I assume it's formaldehyde. The museum itself is a bit of a maze. I actually on first pass missed half of the museum, and it was only on the way out when they said to me that was quick. But I went back in and found my way through the rest. But it's shelf after shelf of fascinating history and samples from centuries of medical research, and particularly he had an interest in understanding the human body. He did voyages where he collected interesting samples, and it certainly is interesting. If you're a little bit queasy, be warned that you're going to see a lot of preserved body parts of humans and animals, but when you see the history of it and the lessons that have been learned from that, he really was a very important man who put forward the study of anatomy and the body, and really his work has led through to a much greater understanding of the human body and also of animals. It's certainly a very interesting museum, not a huge one, but it's free. If you're on the way to, say, the British Museum, or heading down to the river to Tate Modern or National Gallery, National Portrait Gallery, it's well worth a visit, and I would recommend visiting the Hunterian and the Sir John Soane's Museum. They do say that you can book your visit in advance. I was on a fairly quiet day and had no trouble getting in. Staff are extremely helpful, and they have lockers by the door where you can set your own code, leave your bag, and take time to wander around. It's definitely a museum that you should go and have a little look and enjoy it. It reminds me a bit of the Wellcome collection, how it used to be years ago when I first went, and there was a collection of old medical devices and history. Whereas today it's very much more on the art collection side. Perhaps it always was, and I just happened to go a few times when there was an exhibition there. But definitely worth a visit. Go to the Hunterian Museum, give it an hour or so, and have a really good look around. It's also a very beautiful building itself, and well worth a little visit. There used to be a lot of buildings like this, and there are, but many of them are associated with royal colleges or universities, and they're not necessarily easy to get into. Now we turn around and we head through Lincoln's Inn Field. Lincoln's Inn Field is closely associated with Lincoln's Inn, which is where barristers and basically lawyers were based, and still are today. A lot of the barristers' chambers are just the way we're facing here. If you turn to the left, they sort of head down the river from there. Now, Lincoln's Inn Field is a lovely little square in central London. There are a few particularly nice squares, but many plush areas of London do have these squares called fields, but they're gated, and to get into them you have to have a key which you get from living there. Whereas Lincoln's Inn Field is one of those which is free for you to travel through. It's a quiet oasis in the centre of London. And opposite we can see the Sir John Soames Museum. Sir John Soames was an architect and is quite a leading man in his time. He bought one of these properties and was renting it out. Then he got an agreement to actually switch the people who lived in each house, and he remodeled it. So you can see it on the left, it sticks out slightly. There's some interesting architectural features like bases for columns. But actually inside, he's really, you could say, gutted it, dug straight down to the basement, and there are a series of rooms leading up to domed roofs with winding staircase that goes through his huge collection. Now, Sir John Soames collected an immense collection, really. There's two entrances and they're controlled by the staff, the volunteers, who will let you in a few at a time so that they control the flow. It is a free museum. There's backdrop so that you don't bump into anything on the way round. And there's just a beautiful collection. It's probably a 30-40 minute museum. I'm sure they'd think it takes longer. But really, there's room after room of collections that the frontage actually hints at. You can see all of the architectural details which have been added, the slightly eccentric collection of statues on the front of a fairly standard townhouse, and also the column bosses, so the bases for columns that just aren't there. Well, when you go inside, there's room after room of plaster casts and details from architectural pieces, and you're talking everything from Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Renaissance, famous buildings around London, pieces that he worked on. There's models of architectural pieces, there's architraves, columns. And I did take photos. You're allowed to take photos inside, but really it's quite dimly lit with very bright skylights. So I'll just show a few of those photos and really talk through some of the key items. I think these photos give you a vague idea of what the museum's like. Effectively a series of rooms with every square inch covered in architectural details, vases, urns, pediments, engravings from walls, detailing, and some of it's very detailed in its description, but most of the key items you just have to enjoy and understand. Certainly a museum that if you're looking to draw something in a museum or you're interested in architecture in any way, shape or form is particularly interesting. And if you are interested in London architecture, I definitely recommend, there's an Instagram account, London Architecture Photography, which covers the smaller details and lesser known, as well as some of the more famous items around London. Now, certainly here we missed the highlight of this room, the sarcophagus of Seti I, which John Soames purchased for £2,000, which today would be getting on for £250,000. And it really is a beautiful example with very finely detailed hieroglyphic scripts covering every detail of the space on the sarcophagus. You also have these beautiful openings rising up to skylights, and you see there a hint of the paintings at the top. There's actually a very good art collection, and he certainly was an avid collectioner of pretty much everything. There's also a modern art gallery where they have changing exhibitions of modern art that sometimes touches on the aesthetic of the museum itself. But certainly a really beautiful museum. I would definitely recommend it. Well worth a visit. And if you're going, go to both. They're really lovely museums. I think far too many people come to London and visit the sort of 4, 5 world-class museums. But there's also these lovely little museums that you could visit on a lunchtime. It's well worth a visit and free. We all like free.